If you think back over the last 12 months, did you achieve all of your goals? Like most of us, the answer is probably no. And the reason is most likely down to discipline. It's something that we all struggle with. Most of us know what we want to achieve, we write it down, but then for some reason we just can't quite make sure that we follow through and that we do it. And if you were to rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 for how disciplined you are, where would you put yourself? Or put another way, if I asked you to set yourself a task and follow through and do it without getting distracted or getting bored, where would you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? If you answered 10, well, absolutely well done. You definitely don't need this video and you should probably be sitting where I am instead. But if you answered, like most of us, a 1 to 5, something like that, then this video is going to help you enormously.
You embody discipline and doing hard things.
Right.
I think we should just start right off with
Yep. Let's just go there.
The bold truth.
So how can we all become more disciplined and improve our lives? Well, the answer is to turn to science. And the reason for that is that we want this to be easy. We want it to be effortless. We don't want to make this something really difficult to achieve. Because let's face it, we all have busy lives. And if you watch through to the end of this video, I'm going to explain why you don't want to just focus or focus too heavily on discipline. So the first piece of science that we're going to talk about is something called mental contrasting, which is developed by a lady called Gabrielle Oettinger. The idea here was they had an experiment and they took 3 groups. And in the first group, they asked people to sit and imagine positive outcomes. So a positive fantasy, achieving what they wanted. In the second group, they asked people to think about a negative fantasy, right? So not achieving what they wanted and staying where they are. And then in the third group, they asked them to imagine where they are now, where they would like to be, and to really think about the contrast between their current situation and that ideal positive outcome, achieving their goals, that positive fantasy that they were creating for themselves. And the study revealed that the people in group 3 who really took the time to visualize what it was going to be like to get from where they are to where they wanted to be had the best results and were the most likely to achieve their goals. So a lot of this comes around visualizing, which if you think about it, is not something we often do when we're thinking about achieving something. We might think about that positive outcome that we want, but we don't actually think about the difference from where we are and where we want to be. And this is something that I've used in the past, and I've actually found it to be quite powerful. And in all honesty, I didn't really realize I was doing it at the time. So when I first started my online business, I used to visualize this idea of being able to choose when I worked, having location freedom, earning a good amount of money. And of course, years later, I realized that, that was my life and I had actually achieved that. And similarly, I used to do the same thing when I first started driving. I had this really crap old VW Golf that cost me like $600 and it was all I could afford. But while I was driving around in that car, I used to imagine myself driving around in, the latest Mercedes or the latest Range Rover, whatever it is, and how that would actually feel, how much more comfortable it would be, how things wouldn't be broken, everything would just work. And I would really visualize it. And, years later, then these things started to come true. So there is a lot to this science. The next bit of science is called implementation intentions. And it was a study done by a lady called Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book called Grit that some of you may be familiar with. And in this study, what they wanted to do was take college students. There was group 1 and there was group 2. And they both had an exam coming up. And they asked both group 1 and group 2 to visualize the positive outcome. So getting the result they wanted, passing the test, and doing well on their exam. So similar to the mental contrasting that we spoke about, but they added an additional step here. So with group 1, they asked them to simply go away and write an article about an influential person in their lives. So someone that had influenced them in a big way. With group 2, instead what they asked them to do was to think about the outcome they wanted. So both groups had thought about the outcome, but the difference difference with group 2 was they asked them to think about the problems that might prevent them from achieving their goal. So they wanted a great result on the exam, but what are the things that might stop them achieving that? So it might be, not having enough time to study, or getting distracted while studying, or not knowing the answer to one of the questions, right? And so what they're in effect asking them to do is to plan on a much deeper level. And this could be applied to anything. So you want to make $10,000 a month. Okay, well, what are the things that might stop you from achieving that? And when we sit and we think about what might stop us from achieving the goal, that means we can think of ways to overcome those. And then again, we're much more likely to stay disciplined, to follow through. And of course, as they found, the people in group 2 did 60% better on the test at the end, on the exam at the end of this process. So that was a massive improvement overall with these groups. And so really, as you can see, this idea of planning is something that a lot of us miss. Let's imagine that you wanted to do a road trip. You were going to road trip somewhere. And a lot of us will think, okay, great, I want to road trip from A to B. B is where I want to get to. But really what we need to be thinking about is, what happens if I get lost? What happens if I can't read a map, or I lose my map? Or what happens if I get a flat tire? And if we think about the things that might go wrong, then we could leave with a plan to overcome those, right? So we take a spare map to make sure we don't get lost. We double check the map multiple times before we leave. Maybe we ask someone we know who's done the journey before, how to get there. We take a spare tire, all these things that you could do to make sure that you're going to stay disciplined and reach that goal that you've set for yourself. The next thing is something called reducing the environmental friction. And what this applies to, if there's something you want to achieve, how can you set up your environment to make it much easier to achieve that goal? For example, recording these videos, I have a set space here in the house and everything is here. So when I want to sit down and record a video, it takes me 2 minutes and everything's set up and then I'm ready to go. And if it was much harder for me to do this, for example, when I first started making these videos, I used to go and rent a space somewhere else, right? A studio space. So I had to book the space and then had to drive half an hour. I had to carry about 3 bags with camera equipment, stands, microphones, lights. And so often the amount of time I spent recording videos was very low. It was once every month that I would go and do this because it was such a pain. And then when I got there, I had to set it all up and I had to take it all down. So the friction was incredibly high. And one of the goals I had last year was to work out more and to work out more consistently. So what I did is I set up a gym in my garage. So I got all the key pieces of equipment I needed. And now I've been able to work out 3 times a week with ease because there's no friction. I simply get out of bed, I walk downstairs, I go into the garage and everything is set up and I can work out, right? It takes me 2 minutes to get there. Whereas again, before I had to drive half an hour to the gym, all these extra things, especially when you have a family and other things going on, it became really hard to carve out the time. And so this principle can be applied and used to form discipline. The easier you make it to do the things you want to do, and the harder you make it to make the things that you don't want to do, right? The things that might be distracting you. A good example is Instagram. So again, last year, I would constantly find myself, as I'm sure many of us do, scrolling on Instagram, wasting time. So I simply just deleted the app from my phone, right? So now if I want to go on it, I have to download it, I have to log in, and it just increased all the friction to actually using the app that I stopped using it. And so this principle is incredibly useful for keeping yourself disciplined and making sure your time is going towards the goals that you want. The next bit of science is monitoring and tracking, right? This idea of checks and balances. So if you've read any business book at any time, you'll have seen this idea of what gets measured gets managed, right? We have to keep an eye on the data and the statistics. And so this played out in my business over the past few months where sales were down. We hadn't been achieving the goals and the targets that I'd set out. And so I said, okay, what is causing the issue here? Why aren't we achieving these sales? Because when I looked, we were still getting lots of leads into the business, lots of high quality leads. So as I was looking in the data, I found that the sales sales team hadn't been spending that much time on the phone, right? They'd over time gone more towards email, so more and more time on email and less time on the phones. And so what I did is I said, okay, instead, I'm going to set a benchmark for what I expect in terms of time on the phones. You all need to spend at least 6 hours per week on the phone talking to customers. And, over time, I've increased that. I've said 7 hours, 8 hours, right? And that has had an impact on our sales. Our sales have gone up. Last month we had the best month for sales we've had in the whole time we've been running the business. And so it's not just me that uses this method, right? When it comes to weight loss, for example, studies have shown that simply tracking your weight on a daily basis increases the likelihood of losing weight enormously. And the reason for that is because you're holding yourself accountable. You're checking every single time. And so you're staying disciplined. And it's the same if you hired a personal trainer. They are going to check, how many reps have you done? How much weight did you put on the bar? How many times did you go? They're going to track everything because that allows them to build a program that's going to help you lose weight and actually achieve the goal that you said you wanted to achieve. And this works incredibly well for two reasons, right? The first reason is that it develops something called intrinsic motivation. So naturally, as we see ourselves progressing, we see ourselves getting better at something, and we've actually started to chip away at the goal that we have, intrinsically, we just want to do that thing more because we said, oh, I'm getting results from this. I'm actually moving towards my goal. I want to do this more now. And the other reason is that monitoring things closely gives us a feedback loop, right? If we actually monitor stuff, we can see what's working and what's not working. Whereas if we're not monitoring, we have no idea if the efforts that we're taking on a daily basis are actually moving us towards the goal that we've set for ourselves. And a crucial element of this monitoring is then that we can see, okay, these things that I'm spending time on are getting me results. So I actually don't need to worry about some of the items. I can just focus on these few things. And again, that helps with discipline because it stops you getting distracted. You know the things you need to focus on. And this goes back to what I mentioned before about my sales team. And so they now know I don't need to worry about emails so much. Of course, I need to get back to customers in a timely manner. But the most important thing I need to do is get on the phone and talk to people because that's where the results come from. And the final part about monitoring everything is that you can build these new habits. So if we have something that we want to achieve, largely it's just the discipline to follow through on habits to achieve it. And so by tracking things, again, it goes back to this idea of a feedback loop. So in my office, I have a big whiteboard. And so the main things that I want to achieve every single week, start of the week for working out, for example, I put workout and then I have 3 boxes on the whiteboard. And every time I do a workout, I tick one of the boxes. And the same is true for coming up with ideas for YouTube videos, writing hooks, intros. I have a little section on the whiteboard. It's 30 minutes of YouTube every single day. And I tick that off each day. And that's just a great feedback loop for me to see that I'm actually moving towards the goals that I've set for myself. And what really cemented this idea for me is that anytime you say you're going to do something, if you don't do it, it's actually a little defeat.
Don't eat this, I ate that. Don't drink that, I drank it. And these all just infiltrate my mental strength.
Just little kind of defeats.
Exactly, little defeats instead of wins. And it just culminates into, and you just don't want to be here. So I'm just figuring myself out like I've never figured myself out before.
Right? So you said, I'm going to get up tomorrow at 6 a.m., but then you didn't and you got up at 7 a.m. That's a little defeat. If you said, I'm going to spend 30 minutes writing for YouTube tomorrow and you don't, that's another defeat. And you want to switch it the other way. So you want to move towards the wins, right? The more you're getting these little wins, the more you're going to build up discipline around that thing you're trying to achieve because it has a positive outcome for you. It's positive every time you move towards it. So make it positive. And the other part of this is don't say, right, I'm going to spend 2 hours every day writing for YouTube. Make it 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you think is achievable, and then build up from there. It's better to set an achievable target and build up from there than something that's just not achievable in the first place. And the final part about discipline is that we always associate it with things that we don't want to do. And this goes back to the point I raised at the very start of the video, that perhaps focusing on discipline is slightly the wrong thing. it has this idea that we're forcing ourselves to do something. And so the way I would frame this is, let's imagine that you want to get in shape. You want to get healthy, you want to lose weight, but you don't really enjoy going to the gym. Maybe you find it boring. And so you have to create so much discipline in your life to make yourself do it. Well, a better alternative would actually be to make it more enjoyable. And that might be that you say, you know what, I'm going to find a sport that I enjoy doing. So instead of going to the gym, I'm going to go play football or tennis or whatever it is, go cycling, something that you don't have to be disciplined to do it because you actually want to go and do it. And this is something that can be applied to work as well. So I've been running my publishing business for about 10 years now, and I'd always been so excited to wake up every Monday and get started, on the business. And then my motivation had really dropped. I was really having to force myself to do the work, to really get into it. And what I realized is that I got into that business because I'm a business book nerd and that's what I love. And over time, we'd kind of moved away from that initial idea, and we now create books for, we create poetry books, we create fiction books, we create children's books, all manner of books. And I love it and it's great fun. But the real reason I started that was because I enjoyed working on business books. And so a switch for me has been to go back focusing my time on the projects that are business books, working with amazing investors and people who've done amazing things and they want to share that journey in a book. And I'm fortunate I have a team, so my team are more focused, on the other books, and it gives me time to focus on that. But the main point here is that I also made work more fun. I find that fun. I love talking to these people and hearing their stories. And so you have to move towards what you find fun that doesn't require all this discipline. And of course, as I'm sure you can imagine, with any business, there are always things that go on behind the scenes: taxes, talking with accountants, financial planning, analyzing data. So there's always going to be elements that aren't fun, but try and include as much fun in your day as possible. And then the other way to do this and to think about incorporating fun is, even when I have to do some of those boring things, such as, go through all the bank accounts, check for any areas where we're overspending, whatever it may be, is I'll pop a podcast on that I've wanted to listen to, or some music I've wanted to listen to, and basically pair up something enjoyable that I'd like to do with a task that maybe isn't one of my favorites. I hope you've enjoyed this video all about discipline. Don't forget to check out some of the links in the description down below, my personal newsletter, some of the tools that I enjoy using, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.